Welcome back. In our last video, we built a capital budgeting model that had all the columns necessary to look at an investment, the associated revenues, expenses, get all the way to net present value and rate of return. And we built it such that we could include the depreciation, even included a DD&A schedule, and also a loan schedule, so we can use project financing for this. Part of that project financing means that we'd have two ways to look at it. The unlevered after-tax cash flow, that would just be the economics of the project. You know, how much wealth does it create and what's the rate of return on the entire project, regardless of how it's financed. The other way to look at it would be just our equity in the project. For example, if the project cost $10,000, but we borrowed $5,000 and only had to put in $5,000 of our own equity, what's the rate of return on that $5,000 that we put in, and how does it change the amount of present value that we create? One mistake that I made in the last video was the label here. It's not really a tax shield. What it is after tax interest paid. And what that means is if we paid $500 in interest, but we're at a 20% tax bracket, and so we got a deduction on that interest that we paid, then our after-tax interest was only $400. That's important because when we calculate the unlevered after-tax cash flow, the first thing we did was start with this net income, or this earnings, an accounting perspective, take out the non-cash items, add in the capital items, and then we want to take out the effect of that interest. So the interest paid less the taxes saved is equal to the after-tax interest paid. The formula for that was correct, but the label was wrong. All right, now that we've fixed that, let's talk about how to rearrange this model into 4 quadrants with the dashboard, linked cells, comments, and a model. First thing I'll do is just come up here and insert a random number of columns with Control-Shift+, and then I'll insert small number of rows with a Control-Shift+. If you don't like Control-Shift+, you can always right-click and insert on a row or column. What I'll do is select a column and row and shade it with an Alt-HHN and pick a color. This shading doesn't do anything to the calculations, of course, but it makes it a little bit easier for us to see these in 4 quadrants. And then what I'd like to do is move these cells down here to our linked cells section. Let me go ahead and label these. This is going to be linked cells, which will make sense soon. This will be our model. This will be our comments, and I'm not going to type it, but this will be our dashboard in here. So I'm going to move. You could either cut and copy, or you could just click and drag to move all these cells out of the way down here. Even going to move our depreciation schedules because this lower left quadrant is just kind of a little calculation area for us. We'll eventually move most of these items up onto the dashboard, but for now we just want to get them all down here. Also going to get rid of these extra rows with a Control-. You can right click and delete, and then I will come along with an Alt-Hoy to clean up those column widths a little bit. I guess I'd better capture those numbers to Alt-Hoy. Okay, we have a little bit more compact model now. We've got it in a copy the width of this column, paste special column widths. We've got it where we can see it all a little bit better. We've got this linked cells section down here. Bold and underline these names for these quadrants. And we're ready to build a dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and build a palette for this dashboard and color it. Copy the width of that. Copy the width of that. I'm going to select all the cells and color them gray. These 3 steps are just going to be to get us a nice palette to put our controls on. Color this one a different color, maybe a light blue or something like that. Now watch this trick. With those cells selected, if I'll go to more borders, Alt HBM, or just the bottom of this drop down, first thing I want to do is get the widest line that I can and a relatively dark gray, and put that gray border on the outside and the right, bottom and the right of the outside of all these cells. Then I want to go to white. It's going to be a little bit hard to see, but I'm going to do it top and left. And watch what happens. We get this optical illusion of this being in kind of a 3D. I think that's nice to catch people's attention. Then at that point we can start moving some of these items up onto the dashboard. So the outputs here, very significant. Net present value and rate of return. Maybe we would like to looks like this would be a good reason to use the word levered instead of leveraged. Save a little bit of space. And I'll also share a trick here. This is a little bit of a dangerous trick, so don't want to do this too much, but if I have cells that I'm worried about fitting, and then let me show you a trick on fitting this text into these cells. Normally we do an Alt-Hoi to widen these columns to fit those cells, but once we get our dashboard perfect and we don't want to be changing it anymore, might be important not to widen those columns. So I'm going to hit Control 1. Remember that's the same thing as clicking this button. And then if I use my right left arrows to go to alignment, there's a thing on here called shrink to fit. And let's see how well that works. So it shrunk the text on those to fit. Now I actually don't like that one's smaller than the other, but we'll leave it for now and move on with the video. If we want to make this look a little bit better, we can come in, maybe shade those cells again. Now we're starting to see what some outputs would look like up there. If I did the same thing with some inputs, then now I'm starting to get a dashboard up here where my user could enter all the data that they need and see all the answers that they need without having to get into my model or anywhere else in the spreadsheet. That's the whole purpose of this dashboard. In the next couple of videos, we'll expand on that, talk about ways to improve it. Just a couple of notes here. Yeah, just a couple of notes here. Like I said, I don't really like those fonts being different, so I'm going to go back to Control 1 and Alt-K and unshrink to fit. And then I'll just do our normal HOI. And I feel free to move the width of these columns around because it's not over here above my model. The width of the columns down here are not that important to me. So if I wanted to add rows, imagine if my model were out here and I needed to add rows to make some more room. That could create a real mess in my model. That's why we have the dashboard and the model in opposite quadrants. We can add or delete or change row and columns without affecting one another. I'm going to move these last 3 up here. Resist the temptation to copy paste. You can cut and paste, or you can just drag these and put those in as inputs, and we'll put these in, or shade these rather, to match the rest of the palette. Okay, in the next video we'll start adding some controls, etc.